Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. As regional tensions deepen, Turkey continues to assert its diplomatic influence through a high-profile Gulf tour spanning Kuwait, Qatar and Oman, where President Erdoğan pushed for new trade deals and renewed efforts towards a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Yet despite these talks, Gaza's fragile truce hangs by a thread, with nearly 100 Palestinians killed in renewed Israeli violations, and international courts asserting Tel Aviv to allow more aid access.
As tensions continue to define the Middle East, Turkey has stepped up its diplomatic outreach to Gulf nations, aiming to enhance regional stability, security, and economic cooperation. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan arrived in Qatar on Wednesday, marking the second stop of his Gulf tour. The visit takes place amid persistent regional challenges, with Ankara seeking to deepen its diplomatic, economic, and security ties with Gulf partners. During his meetings with Qatari officials, Erdoğan discussed bilateral relations and explored new avenues for cooperation in areas such as trade, energy, defense, and infrastructure. Talks also focused on key regional developments, including ongoing conflicts across the Middle East and joint efforts to foster peace and stability. Erdoğan's Gulf tour highlights Turkey's expanding influence as a mediator and strategic partner, seeking to balance relations among major Gulf states while promoting collective security and economic growth. The Turkey Gulf Cooperation Council dialogue continues to gain momentum, driven by mutual efforts to boost trade, investment, and energy partnerships. Ankara has also played an active role in advancing defense and infrastructure collaboration with Gulf countries, strengthening shared interests that extend beyond politics and security. As Turkey reinforces its position as a key diplomatic actor, analysts interpret its renewed engagement as part of a broader strategy to balance regional alliances and sustain geopolitical stability. Given the continued volatility in the Middle East, Turkey's growing role in the Gulf is expected to play a crucial part in shaping the region's future dynamics.
Joining me today to discuss all the latest developments is political analyst Javed Rana from the Pakistani capital. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Javed, let's start with President Erdoğan's tour of the Middle East. He visited Qatar, Kuwait and Oman. How important is this tour, not just for Turkey, but also for this region at a time when we see Israel's growing actions in the occupied Gaza Strip and against other countries as well?
Obviously, Turkey has historical ties with the Gulf states, and particularly at this moment when the President Tayyip Erdoğan has visited Gulf state, this is extremely important. One dimension is the defense cooperation, the trade cooperation, the investment. I think the underlying current here is basically the Gaza ceasefire, how to hold it, and how to sustain a kind of pressure from the Gulf state where it is made sure that Israel does not further violate ceasefire agreement. That means that so far we have seen that nearly 100 people have been killed in occupied Gaza. And despite the fact that there was no breach of agreement on the part of the resistant groups. So anyway, going back to the main subject of your question, is basically, essentially, the defense and economic ties. Turkey has been exporting defense products to Gulf states. It's around 34% of the overall its exports, which is around $31 billion, which is a pretty huge amount. Then, in a similar fashion, it has a cooperation with the Gulf states. So, in that broader context, we have to see now bigger picture. This is the high time when Turkey needs its economy to improve, and that is why we have seen that the President Tayyip Erdoğan is trying to attract more and more investment. But at the same time, we should not also forget that when it comes to Qatar, Qatar is the only Gulf state with which Turkey has the highest amount of its relationship in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of trade. The volume of the export that Turkey has been making to Qatar, it's around 3.5 billion US dollar. And more importantly, Turkey is a kind of a counterbalance to from the other Gulf states. You may recall that just 5-6 years ago, there was a complete blockade of Qatar. And then that was the time when Turkey literally saved Qatar. And I think that in broader context, now we have seen that the 3,000 to 5,000 Turkish troops are on the Qatar's land. And apart from that, its air force is there. So in a broader context, I think on one side, we are seeing that Pakistan's military force is in Saudi Arabia. They have a defense pact. And I think in a similar fashion, we are seeing there is a similar arrangement with the Qatar, which is extremely important. So in a broader context, I think it looks like that Turkey is spearheading efforts whereby it can have some kind of a loose arrangement with all Arab states, including those of the Muslim countries, on a kind of a bloc which is not very different to that of the NATO.
Javed, Turkey and Qatar are also really good allies with Afghanistan. And just recently, Turkey and Qatar mediated the ceasefire between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Tell me more about that, Javed.
I think Turkey's and Qatar's role is very important. At a time when both Muslim countries were fighting with each other, I'm talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan, on issues which could have been long resolved through bilateral arrangements. I think Turkey had to intervene diplomatically, friendly. Qatar, yes, did host all these talks, but my reports are from different sources that it was actually the Turkey which mediated between two brotherly countries. That was the reason that the ceasefire actually was inked between the two countries without intervention of the Americans, because Donald Trump at that particular point of time was desperate to intervene because he wanted to give himself credit of bringing peace between another two countries. And he had publicly said that it is easy for him to do it. But before that could have happened, I think Turkey, as a brother Muslim country, intervened. It mediated. There were difficult issues to sort about the hideouts of the alleged terrorists on the Afghan side of the border. And that is where I think the Turkish interlocutors were there to help both countries. And now that is why we have seen not only the ceasefire agreement, but on 25th of October, within the next couple of days, Turkey is going to host both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they are going to have some kind of a discussion whereby a viable mechanism could be evolved to make it sure that there is no more infiltration from Afghan side of the border into Pakistan side of the border. And that mechanism is going to be very, very important. And now it looks like, when you look at Pakistan's televisions, commentators, and politicians, my understanding is that now they've been heavily dependent on to Turkey and its role. Turkey has an influence on Afghanistan, like Qatar has an influence, because Pakistan has terribly failed in prevailing upon the Afghan government to bring an end to this terrorism, because they've been providing shelter to the terrorists. And now it looks like the Turkey is going to help Pakistan and Afghanistan, more particularly to Pakistan, to find a kind of a mechanism where it is going to intervene diplomatically to make it sure that there is no more hostilities between two brother Muslim countries. And more importantly, I think we have to see the broader picture, that because of these recent clashes, we have seen there is a lot of disruption to the back and forth movement of tens of thousands of Pakistani and Afghanis who routinely move on the both sides of the border. And also the trades have been suspended. That is now coming back to place. Again, the courtesy is obvious to the Turkey and Qatar's role, which is extremely important. And this also, Umar, is an indicator that Pakistan's for the first time, I have seen in the recent years that there is a tangible, very meaningful brotherly intervention from the Qatar and the Turkey, and that was very effective, unlike that of the Americans. during the time of Pakistan and India's war. So I think it looks like that the Turkey is essentially, it has always had its focus on strengthening ties among the Muslim countries. And what we have seen during last couple of days, that is just an indicator what Turkey has been doing with the rest of the region in similar situation.
Javed, we cannot forget India. Now, when these cross-border clashes started between Afghanistan and Pakistan, India was the first one to support the Afghans, and it said that we are there, we are backing you, we are there for you. So when we look at India's role in this context, and also when it fought against Pakistan a few months ago, how is Turkey looking at India? Because India accused Turkey as well of providing Pakistan with weapons, with drones. So how is Turkey monitoring that situation? Because it has to deal with India as well at the same time when it comes to Afghanistan and Pakistan, right?
Well, Turkey had a bit difficult time dealing with India after Pakistan and India's war. The reason being that India was expecting that no country would help out Pakistan. But what Turkey did was obviously something Pakistan was expecting. India had little idea that the nature of the relationship that exists between Pakistan and Turkey over the course of the decades. It's a historical ties, and I think during the war between two countries, both countries have proven the fact that their ties are much beyond the diplomatic nature of the relationship. These are genuine brotherly relations. And that is why we have seen that there was actually supplies of the weapons. There was a diplomatic support. And then there was obviously intelligence sharings. All what Pakistan needed, I think Turkey was there to provide it. And that was something which was very upsetting for India. And then a similar fashion, China's role was very dominant in terms of providing all kind of the weaponry support. And after China, I think it was Turkey's role, which is extremely important. And more importantly, the role of the drones which Turkey has provided to Pakistan, I think those were very effective tools in curbing Indian onslaught onto Pakistani side of the border. There were hundreds of the drones, Turkish-supplied drones, which were flown onto the Indian side, and they turned out to be very smart and effective tool. So in that border context, this was essentially a context of the situation. Now, when it comes to Pakistan and Afghanistan, which have a historical brotherly relation, because on the both sides, the side of the 2,700 kilometer long border, there are ethnically same group, religiously the same group. It was an opportunity for India to exploit that situation, to pitch one Muslim country against another. And I think President Erdoğan did sense that situation, that in case there is no intervention in Pakistan and Afghanistan clashes, India is going to exploit the situation. It will pitch one brother against another. I think the timely intervention by the Turkey, it's a mediating role, I think went a long way to at least hold a ceasefire, because there was a kind of situation which could have gone beyond control, because it looked like that Pakistan had also a contingency plan where it could have gone for some kind of a regime change operation. Regime change operation could have brought more chaos inside Afghanistan. That was a situation which was not acceptable to Turkey, because for Turkey, the stability in the South Asia is important, and bringing any regime change operation in Afghanistan does not bode well for the stability of the region. And more importantly, there could have been more chaos inside Pakistan and in Afghanistan, because the Afghan Taliban with their allied militant groups, they could have played havoc, because their strength is insurgency. And I think that is where Turkey sensed the situation. They intervened. I'm privy to some of the information whereby Turkey's interlocutors were discussing the nitty-gritties during the 10 hours long discussions. They were discussing that if this kind of situation erupted, what is going to be the mechanism? And now as we speak, I think within the next couple of days, the Pakistan interlocutors and the Afghan interlocutors would be here in Istanbul. They are going to discuss that. My understanding is that probably the mechanism would be that if the terrorist incidents surge up to the 80%, that is where I think there's going to be some kind of friendly diplomatic intervention by the Turkey. It's going to have, obviously it has an influence on the Afghan government, and they are going to play their role to bring an end to the very managed kind of a manage and control insurgency by the militant groups who've been provided shelter inside Afghanistan. The broader picture is Afghan government essentially doesn't want to expel them because these militant groups have fought with them against the US-led NATO forces during 20 years long war. And then the fear in Kabul is that in case they expel these militant groups, then they may join the Daesh, which you know is a very extremist group, and that could have destabilized, and that can possibly in the future destabilize Afghan government. I think because of those assessments in Kabul, they have been reluctant to expel these terrorist groups or stop them from carrying out attacks on Pakistan's military. But for Pakistan, there was no option. And I think these are the now factual position on the ground. That is where the role of the Turkey is going to be there in the talks which are going to be held in Istanbul within the next couple of days.
Javed, thanks for those comments. I'll be right back with you. South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice has become a global flashpoint, intersecting with ceasefire talks, war crime allegations, and a growing debate over justice and accountability in Gaza.
There was confusion perhaps at the beginning, but increasingly many genocide scholars, these are professional academics, intellectuals that study genocide, have come to the conclusion that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, including Israeli scholars. You can imagine they take a keen interest in this issue of genocide because they are, as a people, have endured a genocide, a Holocaust. And many of them are saying it's a genocide. People need to have access to basic services, water, electricity, food, and so on. So a combination of these things, both within the convention, the definition, and what was observed happening in Gaza, is what compelled the South African government to take Israel to the International Court of Justice. That's why the solidarity between the peoples of South Africa and the peoples of Palestine is so strong, because South Africans know exactly, when it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And so with us, it is quite clear that Israel is an apartheid state. Some other liberals and Jewish think tanks and so forth might argue otherwise, but we know what we know. And what we have experienced is what the Palestinians are experiencing. In fact, they're experiencing far worse. Imagine if we had a situation where the Nationalist Party bombed Soweto to thy kingdom come like they did in Gaza.
Genocide is really difficult to prove, especially this element of intent to destroy, because generally speaking, leaders, and you can imagine, heads of state, prime ministers, military commanders, when they do indeed pursue such a genocidal policy, especially with all of these courts and laws that exist today, that most of the time they're going to be really careful about what they write down, what they say. So generally, this is something that is not easy because, a leader is not going to come out and say, we are here to kill and, expel all the members of this and this group, because they're aware that this brings potential legal sanctions, diplomatic consequences, all kinds of problems for the state, right? Genocide is a political crime in the sense that it seeks to achieve a political outcome, demographic change, resources, control over territory, and all of that. So it could be imaginable that some of these sort of processes may take place, some influences and alike, but I think for the moment, the case proceeds as it is and is in that sense formally independent from it, cannot be made into a part of the ceasefire and then, if you do this and this, we drop the case. I do not see that happening, no.
Javed, we were talking about Gaza. We were talking about the Israelis. We were talking about Turkey's role in this region. Now, as part of the International Stabilization Force, Israel has some reservations. Israel says that it does not want Turkish forces on the ground. What are your thoughts on that?
Of course, apartheid Israel would not like the Turkish troops on the ground. That means after First World War, this would be the first time that the Turkish troops would be on the occupied Palestinian territory. So essentially, I think Israel, and for right reason, they believe that the Turkish troops are not going to be used. They would not be willing to disarm Hamas. They would be there as a peacekeeping force. They would not watch the apartheid interest of the Zionists. That is the reason that the Israel is opposing it. And in a broader context, we have to also see that the acceptability of the Turkish troops on the occupied Palestinian land, more particularly in Gaza, that would be welcomed by all and sundry in the occupied Palestinian territory. And that is something which is not acceptable for Netanyahu. He knows how popular President Erdoğan is among the Palestinians. He knows the historical context. So that is why Netanyahu has been opposing it behind the scene, something now he has also said it publicly. But we have to see the broader contour of the situation, that international stabilization force has to be comprised by the Muslim countries whose leaders had met with the President Donald Trump in Washington and in New York also. And this is extremely important. I don't think that the Israel has any legitimacy or morality to say no to any particular country who wants to send its troops on Gaza as a peacekeeping force. Now the problem is that the Netanyahu is in league with the Americans, who are essentially a collaborator. They want the military troops from the countries, from Muslim countries, who are willing to disarm Hamas and other resistant groups inside occupied Gaza. So this is a bigger problem. I think their best option, and they are desperate, Israel is desperate to have Azerbaijan's troops on the ground. Azerbaijan is a secular state. Azerbaijan's troops, according to Israel's perspective, probably they will be doing their bidding. And in a similar fashion, they would also prefer the Indonesian troops. And they believe that these Indonesian troops can do the bidding of Israel in terms of disarming Hamas and other resistant groups. And then they are also would like to rely upon Egyptian troops and some of the other Arab states, because obviously all these Arab monarchs, they do not want Hamas to survive politically, militarily, and socially inside the occupied territory. So in that broader context, I think Turkey stands out. Turkey has diplomatically and politically has advocated this case of the Palestinian in a manner that no other country has managed to do it. Yes, Iran has militarily supported Hamas and other resistance groups in the past, but so far as the diplomatic maneuverability is concerned, so far as the political influence of President Erdoğan is concerned, not only to the Muslim countries, but also across the region, his tackling of the Europeans, his influence on the Donald Trump, despite his all nonsensical policies, I think we have seen that Donald Trump has been very nice to President Erdoğan. Reason being is that the President Erdoğan diplomatically handled him in a manner that no other country has handled him. For President Erdoğan, this ceasefire agreement is a relief to the genocide of the Palestinians. And while knowing that some of the points, some of the clauses of this so-called peace accord does not fully protect the interest of the Palestinian, but he accepted it, thinking that there would be a maneuverability. There would be a chance for the further negotiations, where the core interest of the Palestinian could possibly be pursued. Now we have to see that it was the influence. Single-handedly, it was the influence of President Erdoğan and his team, as a result of which Hamas agreed to this peace accord. Now we are seeing the smart moves on the part of Hamas. Hamas is saying that they are willing to disarm themselves. They are willing to hand over power, but only to the Palestinian faction, where there is some kind of understanding, some kind of a coalition with a consensus. And then Hamas, very importantly, is also pointing out that it would not disarm itself as long as there is a Palestinian statehood. Now, these details are extremely important. These are the things which are becoming a very problematic for Netanyahu. And Netanyahu somehow or the other wants that instead of the Turkish troops on the occupied Gaza, they want some other troops from the other countries. Reason is quite obvious. It is a kind of a competition, a contest between President Erdoğan and Netanyahu's genocidal agenda. My understanding is that sooner you will see that Netanyahu is going to be outsmarted by President Erdoğan, because at this particular point of time, there is a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to hold this ceasefire. We know that he has already killed nearly 100 Palestinians. And there was no reason of breach of the ceasefire agreement, because Hamas did not attack Israeli troops. It was unexploded ordnance at the near Rafah cross bordering, which blew up, and 2 Israeli soldiers were killed. And as a result of which they have killed in retaliation nearly 100 Palestinians, and there were nearly also 100 airstrikes inside Gaza. So in that border context, I think now we have seen the special U.S. envoy in the Middle East. He's in Israel. The U.S. President's son-in-law has been to Israel. And then, more importantly, I think U.S. Secretary of State is going to be in Israel within the next couple of days. U.S. Vice President is already there in the West Jerusalem. All they are doing is they are trying to put pressure in a sustainable manner to make it sure that there is no more breach of ceasefire agreement, because Palestinians are being killed. They are dying of hunger. And Israel is not only just have killed them through airstrikes, still they have blocked the half of the aid trucks which were flowing into the Gaza. So in a broader context, I think next coming days and weeks are extremely important. How this so-called peace accord would unfold, and President Erdoğan's plan on how to handle the situation is extremely important and needs to be watched in coming days and weeks.
Javed, now that the ceasefire is in place, what happens to the proposed annexation of the West Bank? Because Netanyahu has still said, he's still reiterating that, we need to annex the West Bank. What will happen there? And some of the countries, like I've mentioned before as well, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, they've all said that annexation of the West Bank remains a red line. So do you think that the Israelis are going to annex the West Bank, considering that there's a ceasefire now, the war has ended, and now it's time to turn attention towards the West Bank? What do you think?
I think just about 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump said that he would not allow apartheid Israel to annex West Bank. That is what he said. And then we have seen that Israel's parliament, the Knesset, preliminary, there's an initial proceeding. They have approved the annexation of West Bank. It's at this particular point of time, it's hard to imagine that there will be immediate annexation. I don't foresee that happening in terms of any legalization, but I think the de facto position is that the occupied West Bank has already been annexed. In terms of more and more housing infrastructure, 200 housing units are being built there. There is more and more military infrastructure. And Jenin, one of the cities of the occupied West Bank, I think tens of thousands of Palestinians, at least 40 to 50,000, they were made homeless. Agricultural lands of the Palestinians from there, more and more agricultural lands have been taken over. Their territories, their buildings have been taken over. So I think for all practical reasons, it is there. My understanding is that for the time being, Israel may not be able to annex it illegally, but it has its de facto sovereignty over there. Now you raised a very important question that it's going to be red line of UAE, Bahrain, or the Arab states. I can only laugh at this because this has never been the red line. it is not the problem of the UAE. These were the UAE's businessmen. There are credible media reports suggesting they were purchasing land in East Jerusalem and selling it to the extremist settler Jewish who want to demolish Al-Quds Sharif, the third holiest site of Islam. This is their character. This is the same UAE whose the Red Crescent has been spying for Mossad against the resistant groups from where they've been carrying out the rocket attacks. So again, and then in the situation so far as Jordan is concerned, Egypt is concerned, Saudi Arabia is concerned, we know they are collaborated in the genocide. We know that Saudi Arabia's private ships, they supplied weapons from the USA to Israel, which were used against the Palestinians. We know that when Houthis were attacking Israeli ships in the Red Sea, and Israel's trade was routed to Saudi Arabia and from there to Jordan and from there to the West Bank and then to the mainland Israel. So I think they are the collaborators. For collaborators, there cannot be any red line. Red line is, yes, it is a red line for the Turkey. It is a red line for the Iran. It is a red line for Hamas. It is a red line for the Palestinian. It is a red line for the common people on the streets of the Muslim. It is also a red line for the Western people. They are more mobilized than the people inside Muslim countries. This is also a bitter fact. So again, I think the hypocrisy and the institutionalized behind-the-scenes support by these Arab monarchs in being collaborators with Israel has brought the situation to a point where Israel feels emboldened, emboldens to annex occupied West Bank, where Israel has already occupied major territories of the West Bank. So I think these are nonsensical statements coming from these Arab monarchs just to befool their own people who do understand what is happening in the region.
Now, Ukraine's security service has revealed a more powerful version of its Sea Baby naval drone designed to strike targets deep inside Russian territory.
Ukraine's security service has unveiled an upgraded version of its Sea Baby naval drone. It says it can operate at distances of over 930 miles and carry a payload of up to 4,400 pounds, twice as much as before. Unmanned weapon systems are becoming increasingly vital in Ukraine's war against Russia as both sides compete to improve drone technology for land, air, and sea battles. Despite the spotlight on aerial drones for the sheer numbers deployed and their destructive power, Ukraine's small, fast, unmanned boats have hit several Russian vessels in the Black Sea, driving the fleet from the Crimean Peninsula and far from Ukraine's coast. This helps keep Ukraine trade routes to Europe open. SBU Brigadier General Ivan Lukashevich told Reuters that Ukraine needs the commercial fleet to sail to keep the economy breathing and to prevent Russian influence. Ukraine's sea drones aren't just for one-time attacks. Some carry remote-controlled rocket launches and guns to target enemy operations. Since the war began in 2022, Ukraine's sea drones have hit 11 Russian ships. In June, they also attacked a key bridge connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland, firing torpedoes that damaged its underwater supports. Another objective of Ukraine's naval drone program is to develop machines that can intercept and destroy enemy drones. But Lukashevich added a cautionary note.
Russia is trying to copy Ukrainian naval drones and is already using them against the territory of Ukraine as much as possible.
Lukashevich also shared that Sea Baby drones are equipped with self-destruct systems to prevent Russia from seizing their technology. However, the primary goal is to bring drones back to Ukrainian shores for repeated use.
Welcome back. Javed, I'm going to ask you a tough question, but at the same time, it's going to be simple as well. How can we end the war in Ukraine? Now, that meeting that was supposed to be held in Hungary between Trump and Putin has been deferred, and EU leaders are going to meet Zelensky today. How can we end this war? How can world leaders end this war and, bring back peace to Ukraine?
I think that's indeed a difficult question for everybody in the world to settle because Russia is simply not listening to anyone. And I think now the latest move by Donald Trump to impose oil sanctions on Russia, I don't think it is going to work. I think they have put a lot of trade sanctions on Russia. And I think during last 2-3 years, we have seen that Russia has managed to find an alternative economic mechanism whereby it has resumed its trade, and the sanctions have not impacted Russia. And then we have also seen that Russia has, more particularly President Putin, has outsmarted Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, who wanted to end this war within 24 hours, and I don't think within next 24 months this war is going to end, as long as I think Russian terms and conditions are not conceded to. And that is what right now Donald Trump has been trying to do, because, and he has said it time and again, that as a matter of fact, that there will have to be given concession by the both sides. And Russia is willing to provide only concessions that the territories it wants to retain, more particularly Donbas region, which is mostly populated by the Russian-speaking population. Putin wants to retain its hold, but still some parts of it are still with Ukraine. And Russia's bargaining chip is that, yes, we are willing to hold negotiations. You have to concede the rest part of the Donbas region, and then Russia may give some kind of concession from the other territories it has already occupied. I think again, I was watching the video report, the news package. Again, I think what Ukraine is doing right now with the support of the Europeans, and lately also now with the resumption of some kind of the military help from the USA, it is a too little and it is a too late. It is not going to work. You know, in response to this, what Russia has done, Russia has come up with the nuclear drills. It has tested its intercontinental missiles. What does it mean? It is providing signals to the Europeans. It is providing signals to the Americans that Russia would dictate its terms now. It's a new world order. US is no longer a sole superpower. US no longer has a kind of the influence that it used to have. European Union no longer has a kind of the influence it used to have. So, and then these threats of a nuclear war by Russia is sending a clear messages that all these conventional weaponries is not going to matter at all in the broader context, because Russia holds the 1/10 of the world's territory. It's a very big country. It is in Europe. It is in the northern part of Asia. So again, it has far more capacity of its strategic depth as compared to the European countries and as compared to the Americans. So again, this is a very dangerous situation. And my understanding is that the Donald Trump, by and large, wants the settlement of this crisis. He wants to end this war on the terms and condition that, by and large, Putin is laying down.
Javed, do you think that the Europeans are deliberately prolonging this war?
Europeans are looking for some kind of a miracle. I don't foresee that happening anytime soon in future. They have lost this game. European and Americans initially under Joe Biden, they mistakenly thought that they are going to make Ukraine another Afghanistan for Russia, who was the then Soviet Union when they invaded Afghanistan, and then Soviet Union collapsed. That did not happen. I think Russia has managed it, and part of the credit does go to China, which behind the scene did help Russia. Then North Korea, which provided all kind of help to Russia, even with their tens of thousands of the troops. Iranians' weaponry was there. Iranian mercenaries were there. So again, this is a new situation where there is an alternative military force. It's not just Russia, which is battling with the Europeans and with the Americans. It is also China. But China's method is a very altogether different. It operates behind the scene and it operates in a very effective manner in terms of some of the critical weapon supplies, in terms of critical intelligence sharing, and then more importantly, something which nobody is looking at, I think through BRICS, through SU, all these forums, both countries, both Russia and China, has managed to establish an alternative economic system where Americans' banks are going to be bypassed, and partially they have already been bypassed. So in that broader context, I think it's a game which Europeans have lost, but they are hoping against hope that they may win. This is unlikely to happen, even if there is a resumption of all kind of the supplies of the weapon that Americans were providing before Donald Trump took over as a president.
Javed, just like you said, Russia has the support of BRICS, of the SCO, of Saudi Arabia, of all these other countries as well. But at the same time, sanctions are being imposed. Ukraine is being provided with weapons. Do you think that sanctions alone can end the war in Ukraine?
Not at all. Because, again, India lately, according to the claim by Donald Trump, which I cannot verify because he's been saying that it has stopped India importing oil from Russia, which is cheaper oil, and India was selling that oil to the European countries. So look at the network, the economic trade in smuggling network that Russia has established. It is selling its oil to India in a large quantity, and then India is selling that oil to the Europeans. So it is the same thing. If the Europe has put sanctions on Russia, this has not turned out to be any effective tool. Now, USA imposed kind of a trade barriers on India, which according to Donald Trump is going to compel India to bring an end to the oil imports from Russia. And Donald Trump mistakenly thinks that he can create conditions where Russia would be forced. I don't think. I think this could have happened long ago, some 2 years ago, had there some common sense in Washington and in Brussels. Things could have been resolved long ago. But now, since Russia is holding more than 20% territory of Ukraine, Russia has a clear edge in conventional weaponry. Russia has a deterrence of nuclear warheads. Probably it has the highest number of the weapons, nuclear warheads in the world. I think it has probably surpassed the Americans. So I think it is a kind of a situation where Russia economically has managed the things. It has a back and support of China. And USA has a kind of the president who lacks common sense, and he's more seen as like a king. In the USA, there is an arbitrary policy on his part. And I think this is the best time for Russia to dictate its terms, and it has been very effectively dictating its terms. Now, lately, a lot of weaponry has been provided by the European countries, and the Americans have also resumed some kind of weapons. But on the battlefield, it is not changing the situation. This is a problematic for the Ukrainian forces. Therefore, my understanding is that whenever this Ukraine war ends, it would end largely on the terms and conditions that Russia would dictate. And the European Union will have everything to fear that once this is resolved on the terms and conditions of Putin, then the fear would be so much high in the European countries. I think it will even affect their economy.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you so much for joining us from the Pakistani capital. It was a pleasure listening to your analysis. That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.